Check. I would like to call this meeting of the Commissioners Task Force in order. I make one announcement. One of the questions that was asked at the end of the meeting last time was about conflict of interest, and I've checked with our board attorney, and he informs me that unless somebody is going to actually benefit personally, there is no conflict of interest, so that should not be a problem. So that should be that. Does that answer your question, Jason? Very good. In that case, there's a slight change to the agenda. Randy is putting it up on the screen and seeing that. And since I can't see you, please identify yourself if you're going to make the motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Adam Thomas, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second, Bert Lewis.
Okay, thank you, Adam and Bert. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. You have before you the minutes of the March 5th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Are there additions or corrections? And if not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
That's Jamie. And
I'll second. Yeah, I'll second. Adam Thomas.
Okay, Adam seconds that. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Seeing no opposed, that motion carries. And at this time, I am going to, I believe, turn this set part of the meeting for an update on the Eanes process to Tate Tateman.
Thank you, Chairman Porter. I'll go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to do a review over the Eanes process and where we are. And it does not want to advance. I'll try this again. That looks like it has worked better. Okay, so we want to do a kind of brief overview to go over where we are with our emergency assistance for non-public schools. You know, we are progressing very well with our launch, and we'll go over some of the things that have occurred, and we will go over our calendar of what will be coming up in the next week. So at this point, we have completed the application. We're just going through some testing of both the online application and the additional Excel template that will be developed or has been developed to accept the requests from school districts. We also have a service center menu. Some people are calling it a catalog that lists and has prices for things that our service center already knows they can provide. There's probably other activities and services they'll be able to provide in addition to this. And then the platform that we're using, which is called the Kansas Common App, and it's been used for other recovery grant purposes as well throughout the state of Kansas. Some of the information that's already out there is we did do a webinar yesterday on March 11th. I believe a few of you were on that. We invited all our private school participants. We had quite a few online. We've also had others that requested recording because they were not able to attend. And that recording in what we call a raw form was sent out this afternoon prior to this meeting. We consider it raw because we do not post it. We will post the final version online once it has been closed captioned, which we expect to occur next week, hopefully Monday or Tuesday, but it just depends on how the closed captioning goes. We're in the final parts of a development of an FAQ. And one thing we're trying to put on the FAQ is also some specific examples that would give our private schools some other ideas. We went over some examples yesterday in the webinar as well. We put out a draft budget template, and the final draft will be available early next week. We encouraged in our webinar yesterday for our private schools to start looking at that. And once we have the final template available, to start working in that, to give them a little extra time before the official application comes out. And that's kind of what this third section is talking about, is because of some requests to maybe push the due date back and have a special board meeting to make the time frame appropriate. We have shifted the application due date from March 26th to a week later on April 2nd. So this will give us approximately 2 weeks to review the applications once we have all of them. We will start reviewing once we start getting any in, but we'll want to be able to have those final reviews done in time to bring those to you as the task force over a period of 2 weeks, and then be able to take them to a special board meeting on April 19th. So the new launch date, to make sure we are within federal guidelines with these new timeframes, will be March 22nd, so a week from Monday. However, like I mentioned before, we provided information of what will be on the application, along with a PDF version and a sample template to our private schools, so they can actually get some of the work done ahead of time and be ready to input a lot of the materials once it opens up. And that last one just talks about, the application materials, including the budget template, will be ready. The template next week, and the actual online application will be available starting March the 22nd. So to see this in a timeline format, you've seen these type of timelines that we're providing. Some of the things that we kind of want to put out that have occurred is this week, and we did do the webinar yesterday. We are working this afternoon and early Monday for next week, which we will set up some office hours specifically for the emergency assistance for non-public schools. That will just be a time we open up a Zoom meeting, which will be sent out to our colleagues in our private schools. It'll be between 1 and 2 hours that we will have staff in the Zoom, and we will be accepting questions from our private schools over the process and any questions they have so far. So we've also, if people want to come and just be in the Zoom and listen to the questions, that's perfectly fine. We'll take the questions as they come. So it's just a come and go event. And then the following Monday, that March 21st, is the official launch of the EANS application. Once this is launched, our private schools can submit their application at any time between March 22nd and the following week, at the end of the week on April 2nd. The specific deadline will be 11:59 p.m. on April the 2nd. So they have the full day on April the 2nd to turn that in. The next couple of weeks, we'll be working and getting those ready for the task force. Our goal is on April 9th to have the initial batch of EANS applications ready for you to make your final decisions on. You will have access to the actual applications prior to that task force, and you will have our recommendations prior to that task force. And we will review our recommendations and take any questions or concerns you have at that time. And then we will finish up those applications on April 16th if we need more time than what we have on April 9th. And then that last week on this chart, on April 19th, the State Board of Education will vote on the task force recommendations to them. And starting April 20th, we will be communicating the decisions to our private schools, as long as starting to work with our service centers to start getting any information to them so we can start providing the services when needed to our private schools. So that is a really quick update of where we are, and we'll take some time for any questions.
Okay, are there any questions?
Chairman Porter, this is Bert Lewis, and I have a question on, I've looked over some of the material that we've been sent previously, and I know we mentioned this at one point, but I'd like clarification. Are you guys using the standard accounting procedure for equipment versus supplies? Are we supposed to use that?
I believe we're using all the same accounting procedures. I'm going to look at it, Craig, and he's nodding his head in confirmation. So yes, that is correct, Bert.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If you do have questions, if you'll just indicate it in the chat box that you have questions, or raise your hand, and we'll try our best to see everybody. And we have other people that are monitoring this to help us make sure that everybody has the opportunity, if they have questions, to ask them. If there are none, we will go on to the next. We'll recap ESSER law and previous funding rounds.
And I will take that, Mr. Porter.
Okay, Randy, have
Please
at it.
get us started. So a little bit about ESSER overview. This will not be new to you, but as a lot of things coming at you, we want to review where we're at with the law. First of all, as you know, there are now 3 ESSER funding mechanisms. The task force will be focused on what will right now on ESSER 2, but it was signed into law this week, ESSER 3. We won't be spending a lot of time talking about ESSER 3 for a month or so, or maybe even longer, but ESSER 3 will be coming. And you can see that the requirements for ESSER 3 are very similar to ESSER 2, but they're not exact. But that will be the focus of the task force, will be the distribution and approval of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. I just want to go over with you again the 15 requirements by federal law that ESSER 2 and will be ESSER 3 funds must be spent on. And I want to start, as I always do, by saying this. Before you apply the 15 areas, you must first answer the question, is this expense because of the pandemic related causes? And then within that, here are the 15 areas. I think a lot of people are missing out that the money that came is authorized for pandemic related expenses. Here's one that basically says that you can use it for any activity authorized by the original title formulas in 1965. You can help your community coordinate response efforts related to coronavirus. Again, resources necessary for principals and leaders to address the needs of individual schools. Activities, including outreach, special delivery to students with special populations. It's a wide range of young people. Get better at your preparedness and response efforts around pandemics. Staff development, sanitation, and minimizing the spread of disease. You can purchase supplies to sanitize and disinfect. You can plan, coordinate, and implement activities around closure of schools and opening of schools. You can purchase a variety of education technology, provide mental health services and supports. You can plan and implement summer school and supplemental after school programs. And the state board, by the way, I'm providing mental health services. And the last one, providing and implementing activities related to summer school and supplemental after school programs, highly recommends that dollars be spent in those areas, as in the next area, addressing learning loss, both social, emotional, and academic, especially with those young people that maybe already were having learning loss and now have even experienced more. Again, high quality assessments, so you can purchase assessments, you can deliver assessments that will help you in this. Evidence-based activities, and provide information again and distribute information to parents about the learning environment, and then do whatever you can to track student attendance and help them engage in distance learning. You that that addressing learning loss among students is again a top priority of the State Board of Education. Lesser priorities, even though they are certainly within the law, are school facility repairs and improvements to help reduce the risk of virus, projects to improve indoor air quality, that can be portable or mechanical, and other activities that are necessary for the operation of the school. This is the distribution of funds in ESSER 2. So if you look at the circle over on the right, it's just under $370 million. 90% of that flows through directly to the school districts. So you can see when you get to the right-hand side, school districts will receive a minimum, and I say that because they have actually received more than 90%. They will directly receive 332.8 million. But we also then, in our 9.5, actually 10% when you count the administration, that 10% set aside, we took 11.5 million at the direction of the State Board of Ed, and we brought the base amount up to a minimum of $300 per student. We set aside $12 million in fiscal year 21-22 and $12 million in 22-23 to impact special needs students under the Special Ed Act. And because the schools for the deaf and blind are state schools and do not receive any funding directly through ESSER distribution, they received, again, State Board passed, and they received $200,000 total for the schools for the blind and deaf. KSD administration, in order to administer this funds, has 1.8 million. That's a combination of a lot of people. Boston Consulting Group is helping us with the administration. Certainly, we have internal staff doing that. We've actually hired an additional person to help track a variety of this, and we may have to actually hire more once we get ESSER 3. We also are partnering with the Kansas Association of School Boards, United School Administrators, and the Kansas Superintendents Association to provide training for school boards and superintendents and principals and special ed directors and everyone under that umbrella on the appropriate use of this money to impact students in a positive way. And I will stop there. And before we go over the ESSER timeline and application, see if there are any questions related to the ESSER law or the general distribution of funds.
Do we have questions?
I think Senator Petty.
Thank you, Randy, for that explanation. My one question is that, looking over that list, can these funds be used to replace state funding, or to just supplement programs that are already funded?
I want to make sure I answer
Does that make
specifically.
sense?
I know it does to you. I want to make sure it does. I want to make sure that I understand it. School districts can expand existing programs, Senator Petty, if you're asking about that. For example, they might have a reading program. They want to expand that and serve more students because of loss. They may want to look at an early childhood solution because they've lost 4-year-olds and they, that 4-year-olds maybe stayed home and now they're screening those and they want to expand that. So they could take an existing program and expand it if their data from the pandemic show that there was some loss during that time. Does that answer your question, or did I miss the mark?
It answers a portion of it, but well, I'll just name a category, high density weighting. If that is eliminated, could it be replaced with ESSER funds?
No, no. State funds in ESSER can be supplanted if it was caused by the pandemic um, and related. So, for example, some states, Senator Petty, cut budgets back in October of 2020 because of the pandemic. And if that would have occurred because of pandemic shortfall, then some of this money with very strict stipulations in terms of equity and in terms of maintenance of effort might have been used to replace that. But that did not occur. So our interpretation of the law is you can't go back now and take something out of the state budget and require school districts to supplant back that money. That would not be an eligible expenditure of the money.
I don't want to belabor this because I know there's lots to cover, but is this an interpretation from Kansas, or is this I mean, I know we're following federal guidelines, but are we interpreting the federal guidelines?
We are,
or is there actually specific specifications dealing with that very issue?
thank you, Senator Petty. We are doing both. That is interpretations coming from the federal government and organizations that represent the U.S. Department of Ed. And then, as you know, all the specifics of the regulation aren't out entirely. So we're interpreting some of that too. But we have consulted with a variety of people at the U.S. Department of Ed, and Dean is on those calls. In fact, I think was on some more today. And that is our understanding of what they have told us related to supplanting. And there's a whole host of other things, Senator Petty, that would have to occur. There's a maintenance of effort component. When we get into ESSER 3, there's an equity component, and there is a component that the overall budget cuts, education couldn't be cut any more than what the overall budget is currently. So all of that did not take place by the Kansas legislature or the governor. And so, as Dean has said, that is correct. What we've been given advice from the federal level is that it cannot be done now.
I'll just add, this is a very critical issue as long as the legislature is in session and we're still working on budgets.
Are there other questions? If not, let's move ahead. Is Doug going to do this? Or are you,
Yes,
Randy?
sir. No, Doug's going to take it from this point on.
Okay, Doug.
Thank you, Commissioner Porter. I apologize for my camera not working. It worked at 2 o'clock at our last meeting, but for some reason I don't see myself, so I'm guessing you're not seeing me either. So you'll just have to imagine what a handsome gentleman I am. So moving on. Well, I'm having the same problem that Tate had. I can't advance.
And Doug, if you continue to have trouble, I'll be happy to do it for you.
Why don't we do that, Randy?
Okay.
Because I am not able to.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so the first slide is much like you saw with Eanes, what our timeline is for the ESSER funds. And what we've set out is that next week we want to have an application ready for districts to take a look at. And when that application is ready, we will do a webinar to present that information and start answering questions. The following week, set up office hours, just like we plan on doing for Eanes. And then we expect applications to start trickling in. We're not sure how many will come in early, but we will handle them as they do come in. I think our plan right now is that we will set a day of the week where are the ones that will be considered for the next task force meeting. And we'll just kind of batch them in that way as they come into the agency. And then those will be approved by you and sent on to the state board for final approval. So in the next couple of weeks, we're hoping that that application is ready to go and districts can start filling it in. Lines of communication, same as we had set up for the Eanes application. Once we have an application ready to go, weekly communications, make districts aware of these Friday afternoon meetings. They can certainly tune into them and pick up the information from there. We are going to be looking for feedback from districts on the application before we finalize it and put it out for review. Like I said, a webinar to go along with that application, the office hours, and then we are developing a fact sheet, and it will be updated as questions come in so that everybody can see what's being asked. The next section deals with the application itself. If you want to go ahead, Brandy. So the goal of our application is to give you all the information you need to approve or disapprove these plans that come in. We're looking for information as far as the impact of COVID on the district. We want some information on prior funding, how the district used its ESSER 1 funds, if they received any spark money, those kinds of things, how that money's been used so far. We feel that's important to give you an idea as you look at what their plan is for ESSER 2, to have an idea of how they spent anything previously and how ESSER 2 builds on what's already been done. We can't duplicate a lot of those things. If it's already been paid for with ESSER 1, you can't go back and pay for it again with ESSER 2. So how do you build on what you've already done so far? And then the other piece of this is the reporting, actually how the funds are being spent, so that you can kind of get an idea of how much is going for instruction, how much is going for materials, just breaking it out into different categories for your information. As with all of our federal funds, there's tests that these expenditures have to pass. Is it necessary? Is the expense related to COVID-19 in the case of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 coming up? Is it allowable? So allowable in this case is, do these expenses fit into one of those 15 categories that Dr. Watson went over at the beginning? Can we tie the expense to one of those categories? And then the last one, is it reasonable? And I think I refer back to a superintendent I had that we're not a Cadillac district, we're a Chevy district. A Chevy will do the same thing that a Cadillac will at less price. So is it reasonable what you're asking to do? So the application that we are putting together, and I'm going to say this a lot, but much like Eanes, we will be using that Kansas Common App for the public schools to submit their applications. Included in that will be just some basic district information, and then we'll have a few narratives included in there what's the impact of COVID-19 on the district so far, a narrative of how they've used their funding up to this point, um, then a narrative of their plan to spend ESSER 2 across those different allowable uses. And we also want to know what's been the impact on their students. Like Eanes, we will have a spreadsheet for districts to fill out. This is where we are needing district input as to exactly how we are going to collect this information. Ideally, what we want to see on that spreadsheet is an accounting of how ESSER 1 has been spent so far up to this point. Then we're looking at a budget for how they plan on spending ESSER 2. So in the Common App, there's a narrative, and then the spreadsheet digs into specifically what are the costs associated with that. So if you're addressing learning loss, for example, through summer school, which that's going to require you to hire teachers, to have buildings open, possibly transportation. And so we're looking for an itemized listing of those expenses that are going to support that ESSER 2 plan that you described. The piece that we're still trying to hammer out is exactly how do we collect this for current records, current reporting, and then looking to the future of gathering this information that we can report back to the task force to tell you this is the amount of money that's been spent on teacher salaries, for example. This is the amount spent on transportation. This is the amount that has gone towards devices possibly, or internet access, whatever those items might be, to be able to itemize the ESSER 2 expenses and be able to report that back to the task force. So we're trying to figure out a balance between what we need on the front end for the plan, and then also how does that align with the reporting that's going to come a little bit later. And then
If I can
finally,
interrupt, we have a question from
Sure.
Frank Harwood.
So my question actually is about the reporting of the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds. So about whether the dedicated special education funds from ESSER 1, whether they're reported the same way as expenditures, and then do the applications differentiate between the special education allocations versus the title or other allocation of the ESSER funds?
our discussion right now has been that in the narrative of the plan, you're going to be describing how you're going to use ESSER 2, your ESSER 2 SPED, and your ESSER 2, I forgot what we called that last one, the equalization pot of money. You're going to describe all three in the same one, but then when it comes to the Excel spreadsheet, there will be different columns to break those out then for, because in the reporting piece for the feds, we're going to have to track each of those separately. So as you turn in the application, we will have separate columns to kind of track that money as this was for ESSER 2, this was for ESSER 2 SPED, this was for the equalization.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Okay, and I think I'm ready for the last slide. Just what the review process, how we envision that rolling out is that as applications come into the agency, we will do the initial screening on, is all the information there that we need? Do we think that the plan addresses the necessary, allowable, reasonable pieces of it? Does it look like a good use of funds to us before we send it on to you? I think the idea is that we will batch them to send to you, and then you could either look at them as a whole based on our recommendations, or you can pull them out and look at them one by one. I think that decision is up to you all on how you do it. Then you will make recommendations that will go to the State Board of Education monthly.
That's in essence the ESSER flow of the application. We would want to see if you have any other questions. I think Frank's questions are good. And I think that next to the last slide that Doug was going over will generate, I think, a lot of thought and questions. I know Craig is wanting to put together a small group on how specifically that flow, that spreadsheet, and how your fund accounting is going to look. Craig, you want to speak to that at all, and about what your thinking is?
Briefly, if I were a school business official and I were a part of this task force, I would probably be expecting a phone call early next week, along with a few others from around the state that we'd like to have look at a mock-up of how that reporting would work, what the spreadsheet would look like, that you would complete and send back to us. And what we're going to be asking for is your suggestions on how to make it as user-friendly as possible on your end of the operation.
I look forward to it.
Okay, I see, at this time, I see no further questions. ESSER application questions and review process.
And I'll go ahead and continue. I do want to say, because last week and, or currently, excuse me, this week and next week and the following week are spring breaks. You pick and choose. Now that next year, I think we're a little bit more common than we are. The certainly the webinar will be recorded, and I know they'll be doing maybe multiple webinars depending on what we need to do on the ESSER funding because of that. You know, and as we take a look at this money, it strikes me that on this equivalent Friday 1 year ago, we were having a conversation with superintendents saying, you know, we probably need to take next week off, buy us a little time, because as you know, the NCAA was canceling the basketball tournament. We were canceling state basketball. And by early next week, we were closing schools and the pandemic was starting, to be honest. So we've been in this now a year going forward. So here then is just very briefly, and I know you're going to have a lot of questions. I'm going to really probably try to defer those because our focus has got to be on getting EANS 1 now and ESSER 2 out the door. But I do want to tell you a little bit of what we know about ESSER 3 and EANS 2. As I mentioned to you, it passed. It is signed by the president and will be coming to us soon. And you can see ESSER 2. I'm not going to go over that. ESSER 3 is very similar. The timeline, though, will be 24 instead of 23. So it extends it out to that third year. Again, you can see 90% are going to LEAs, but in this law, it specifies that 20% must be used for learning loss, even though I think we're saying in ESSER 2, we hope that a lot of that. The categories are almost identical. Our set-asides, state, we will set aside 5% for addressing learning loss, 1% for after school, 1% for summer enrichment. And again, we have another 3% for administration and a little bit of discretion. And if you are not open for business in person, you must publish your plan, including a public comment for how you're planning to reopen. That will be a part of the law.
We have
for those that have.
Melissa Rooker.
Yes.
Thanks, Jim. Randy, I just wanted to clarify, you said that with the discretionary funds, you said we will set aside those percentages for the different categories, but can you clarify, is that prescribed in the federal law?
What you see, Melissa, in the SEA set aside is prescribed in the federal law. The discretion will be to the State Board of Education for them to set that aside. It's given the agency and the state board. So the 5% learning loss is in the law, the 1% after school is in the law, 1% summer enrichment's in the law. Eanes 1, as you know, 26.7 million. We anticipate that the Eanes 2 will be a similar amount. Don't know if it'll be exact, but a similar amount. Again, you can see it'll go through 24, focuses on low income and COVID need. In this case, though, there's no reimbursements backward. So in Eanes 1, you can backward reimburse, but in Eanes 2, you cannot. And, Janet and Nick, I apologize, but we're going to have the same tight time frames from the time the governor orders the money to be drawn down. Now, I will say this with the entire COVID relief bill. There are lots of other parts to that COVID relief bill than ESSER 3 and Eanes 2. I know that Senator Petty asked the supplant question earlier. There will be money that comes directly, and Adam, you may know this, Prophet, you may know this more, but there will be money coming directly to the state for state and local need that we'll have no oversight of. There's money that will come directly to special ed. They up the amount of money coming to special ed formula from the federal government. And there's a whole host of other things in that bill, unemployment and lots of other things that this task force won't be a part of. Adam, I don't know if you're even prepared to talk about any of that, even at a surface level. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just wanted you to know there'll be a lot of talk about what's in that bill, and you'll be going, because it's not part of the purview of this task force.
Yeah, Randy, if you don't mind, I would like to. Actually, I'm going to kind of work backwards. You're absolutely correct. There are a whole host of provisions contained within HR 1319, not the least of which is direct state and local aid. Secretary Burns Wallace with Department of Administration is leading the recovery office and has been for some time. She's working with BCG and others to make sure that everything is tracked and ticked and tied, and they are all over it as soon as details come out. As Randy mentioned, with this particular pot of money, you might imagine with the other pots of money as well, we're still waiting for other direction. As it relates to Senator Petty's question from earlier, I would say that NASBO, which is my association, the Association for State Budget Officers, the information we're receiving from them out of DC comports with what Randy was reporting as well in terms of the restrictions on supplanting. And I think it's also important to remember that there are multiple facets to this. There's the first question that Randy mentions, is this related to the pandemic, right? And then there's the 15 allowable uses. And then there's a maintenance of effort. And then separately, is this school finance funding? And if so, it's covered kind of under the GAN case versus what's covered under the federal funding. So there's a whole host of things that you have to flow through. But back to Randy's point, yes, there will be some direct state and local aid. Amounts are not yet finalized, and still waiting on the Secretary of Treasury to promulgate rules and regs in terms of how that can be used.
Thank you. We have questions from Janet Eaton and then Nick.
Okay, so I have two questions. Just to clarify, the Eanes 2 will that be the same process as what we are right now? Meaning that the money will come through the state, or will it come through the public school district? That's maybe a question. We'll just give that question to start with.
Janet, Eanes 2 will flow just like Eanes 1. It will come from the state. The process will be very similar. What I can tell you is, again, the key to that is when the governor says it's time to order the drawdown of that money, and then in this last case, it was received the next day, I believe, or the next business day. That's when the time starts on all these tight time frames. So we'll want to try to coordinate that with the Office of Recovery to make sure that we do that in a timely manner in conjunction with the state, when the state board could approve it.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question would be, I know that the PPP loans and the current Eanes contradict each other, and you cannot be double dipping. You can't qualify for the PPP and process the Eanes 1. Do we know about the Eanes 2?
Excellent question. I have no knowledge of that, so I'm looking at Dean or or some of our
Yeah.
other people?
No, great question, Janet. And yes, those restrictions would still apply to EANS 2. So
Okay.
if you access the new PPP second draw, you would not be eligible to access either EANS 1 or EANS 2. But if you accessed any of the older original PPP, that's just fine.
Okay, thank you.
And we will want to coordinate with the private school so we can give you as much time as possible. So because we really want this money spent in the appropriate place. So we want to give you every possible opportunity to get that. Nick, you're muted, Nick.
My questions were similar to Janet's. I probably concur with the previous statement, Gene, because I've heard that this morning from other sources about the PPP. Um, number two was the first one, main one was, if it is the same process, I would hope that we would have a running start before um, that we have experience for this round, that it will flow into the next round. So I'm hoping that there'll be some flexibility, and I think we'll know a little bit more what we're doing when we're going into the next round. So I hope it's easier from that aspect.
We do too, Nick. We hope that this experience, maybe as painful as it's been on the short time frame, will help as we get into the next flow of money.
Question from Lisa.
Yeah, I was wondering, so applications are submitted and we approve them, but what if expenditures aren't exactly how they were anticipated? And maybe they couldn't fill the positions like they thought. So what is the process? Will they have to do an amendment and what's that materiality that they have to do an amendment for?
I know they would have to, Lisa, if it was going to be above what they had requested, they'd have to do that. I'm going to again lean on some of our staff as to their current thinking about if they do not spend all their money. I know that money can be brought back either on the private or the public side, or the private side and redistributed. On the public side, it's their money to spend maybe in a different way. Dean, do you want to advise on that?
Sure, I can do. I saw Brad turn his video on too, so he's welcome to jump in if he likes. And Lisa, are you asking about for EANS or for ESSER?
Well, I mean,
or both?
I guess both. I mean, I
Okay.
understand they're different, but I think
Yeah.
both.
So good question, and it's going to be a little bit different answer for either one. And we are still going to be working through the details, particularly on the ESSER side over the next week. So they're coming fast, but we're working out some of the logistics of it. But in both cases, ESSER and EANS, we're looking for what's requested in the applications, and we're going to try to make sure that we're able to provide all those services that are allowable and that there's resources to provide. So if it's a matter of, for instance, on the EANS side, maybe they have difficulty either recruiting the staff that they were hoping to, or that the amounts come in differently, then we'll try to figure out something else within the scope of what's allowed with the funding and whatnot. Similar on the ESSER side, we would be working with the districts to revamp as necessary, and of course all that information, the task force is always going to get updates on what was actually done and be involved.
Are there any other questions? If not, I would like for you to notice the time.
He's trying to bank this time because I have a feeling he's going to use it to his advantage later on.
Yeah, I think so. Now, do we anticipate, this was our last training session, if I believe, and the next session was supposed to be actual start the process of approving applications. if I look at this correctly, am I seeing correctly that we will not have a batch of applications until April
The
the
ear-
9th?
The earliest you could have ESSER applications would be March 26th.
So we will call meetings. We'll let you know if we have applications.
Yes, I
Because
would
there's no
say,
use us meeting if we don't have application or don't have a batch of applications.
there's certainly no meeting next week, and we can inform you after that. There's a meeting the following week. And I think Mike Augerbright had a question, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I will prefer not to call on Mike. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, Craig, just a couple comments from a couple superintendents on reporting expenses and using our budget function and codes, just because that's what we know and we're kind of used to that, and that would assist with the state audits, any federal audits, and obviously our independent audits. So I just wanted to pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so glad to hear you say that. We've been headed the right direction. Thanks.
We have been building, Mike, over the last week. The budget workshop for this next year is going to be really a really interesting workshop. We'll have lots of interest for a variety of reasons in that budget workshop. Some of it legislative if it goes through, and some of it ESSER funding.
Well, thank those of you that are presented. We appreciate that. Thank those of you that had questions. We appreciate that. Thank those of you who participated. We appreciate that. Those of you that are getting ready to go on a spring break, it looks like you're going to get an hour's head start. And we, again, look forward. We will not meet next week, but may it'll be called if necessary the week after that, and then every other Friday for the rest of our lives. We are adjourned.